Welcome back. You're watching Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. But first, our top stories. The father of missing teenager Jay Slater has told Sky News his family has been going through a living nightmare since his son disappeared on Tenerife 6 days ago. Both Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak have condemned Nigel Farage for his comments claiming the EU and NATO provoked Russia into invading Ukraine. Palestinian officials claim 42 people have died following airstrikes in northern Gaza, with Israel saying it was targeting Hamas infrastructure. You are watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. In the next half hour, we'll see what's making the headlines with Editor-in-Chief for National World, Nancy Fielder, and broadcaster and psychotherapist Lucy Beresford. So let's see what's on some of those front pages for you now. Well, Nigel Farage's controversial claims that the EU and NATO provoked Russia to invade Ukraine attract strong criticism in the Mail from the president of Ukraine, who says Mr. Farage is infected with what he calls the virus of Vladimir Putin. The Times leads with a report that another senior Conservative official is under investigation for allegedly placing dozens of bets on the date of the general election before it was announced. The Mirror claims an exclusive with news that Rishi Sunak and his wife have seen their income rise by £1 million a month in the last year, thanks to their investments. The Observer carries a warning from leading economists and diplomats that Keir Starmer's election pledge to grow the UK economy will not work without access to the European single market and the customs union, which we left as part of Brexit. Sir Keir Starmer also features in The Telegraph, saying that bigger state handouts to the poor are not enough on their own to end what he calls Britain's malaise. The Sunday People reports on a 6-year-old girl, Amelia Bird, who survived an attack by a pack of XL bully dogs. And finally, the Star leads with fears that the Just Stop Oil defacing of Stonehenge this week could spark an invasion of Earth by aliens. How they're related, I do not know. A reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us. And we are joined tonight by Nancy Fielder and Lucy Beresford. Welcome to both of you. Let's start with the Mail front page and this remark from President Zelensky following on from the comments that Nigel Farage has been criticised for and made, suggesting that NATO in the the West really encouraged President Putin to invade Ukraine. Lucy, take us into this story.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting story for 3 reasons, really. First of all, we've already had the backlash, I think, towards Nigel Farage's comments. He made them during an interview with Nick Robinson. He said that, in effect, NATO had egged Russia on and even though he did say that Russia was to blame for the war, he was very clear about that. There was some sense in which somehow the West had some responsibility. And Ukraine's leader is, quite rightly, absolutely furious about this. And I think this is interesting, partly because it's very unusual for foreign leaders of other countries to chip in when another country is having an election, to actually make a really explicit comment about the commentary that other maybe contenders have been making. So you've got Zelensky now wading into the British general election. You've also got a situation as to whether this could impact on Nigel Farage's own personal standing. He's standing personally in one particular seat in Clacton, but also, you know, he's the leader of Reform now. So will that have any impact? He is a Marmite politician. Is it going to actually draw more people to him or not? And then thirdly, I think we also ought to recognise it's a very critical time for the war in Ukraine in general. And if Zelensky feels that there could be anybody in other Western countries who is beginning to show the same kind of sentiments that, for example, Farage has spoken about, maybe Trump might say the same thing. it puts Zelensky in a very difficult position. He had a peace summit in Switzerland a couple of days ago, didn't quite get the same, Western backing that he might have wanted. So for those three reasons, I think it's a really powerful story.
Nancy, in terms of condemnation, it's been widespread from Rishi Sunak, from Sir Keir Starmer, also Ed Davey as well. He's been roundly criticised. I mean, this isn't going to win him any support or really put people in a frame of mind to vote for him, is it?
No, but I don't think it's going to put people off voting for him by any stretch of the imagination. And guess what it's done? We're all talking about him. It's front of the newspapers again. A party that hardly existed until he put his name to it is, some polls suggest, is outstripping the government now, the party that's been in government for a very, very long time. We are all talking about it now. I don't think anybody really agrees with him, but actually you would, if you were Zelensky, get involved, because let's be honest, America is standing very close to changing hands and going back to Donald Trump. He's not got the same position on it as Joe Biden has, and Zelensky, without the Western support, Ukraine is effectively wiped out, isn't it? Let's be completely honest. And so he has to come in at this point, because as a country, we've been 100% behind Ukraine. We were the ones who sort of opened our doors. We've been overwhelmingly supportive of Ukrainians coming and living here. And this is the first time somebody's put their hand up and gone, oh, actually, maybe it's not that straightforward. So it's that massively important that Zelensky tries to put a lid back on it right now.
But the problem is, Nigel Farage, his whole shtick is about being a disruptor. It's not even necessarily about having a policy that he thinks might be enacted at any time soon. It's less about what he actually says and more about the fact that he's daring to say some of these things, because, as Nancy is saying, some people really don't mind what he says. They're going to vote for him anyway, because what they're voting for is not necessarily the party, but they're voting for someone who they think is going to shake up the system.
And this is not a slip-up. Some people are saying, oh, he's put his foot in it. He is very calculated. There's nothing that comes out of his mouth that is not designed to get attention, designed to get on the front page, designed to get us talking about him. And I don't think this is the issue that he is winning votes on, but it's certainly not the issue that is going to put people off. He's one of us. He puts himself across as. It's absolutely not right. But now he's going, well, how am I not allowed freedom of speech? He's always got a defence that is very, very clever the way he plays it.
And Lucy, he hasn't seemingly rode back on his comments. In the Times, we've got him repeating the claim that the West provoked Putin. So as Nancy's saying, it's a deliberate tact. He's not going to back down from it.
No, because ultimately this is all about the oxygen of publicity. It's not about necessarily what he says. It's the fact that he feels that he needs to be saying these kinds of things at all. Because again, in a way, reform is the major surprise story of the last 6 months. They have gone from absolutely nowhere in most of the polling to actually, in at least one poll, being 1% ahead of the Conservative Party. So it is a really impressive record over the last 6 months. But the way that that's been achieved is by being the disruptor, being the squeaky hinge that gets the oil. It's about being the person who perhaps says the things that some people might be thinking and not daring to say. But when it comes to this particular issue, there are too many people now who are going to gang up on him. And as I say, there's been a backlash already from all the parties, but that just makes Nigel Farage, he loves that position. Yep. It's me against the establishment.
That's always been his position. He's the outsider and, as you say, the disruptor. Let's move to this story in the Times, one that will not have Rishi Sunak smiling at the headlines, and this is that another top Tory has placed dozens of bets on the election date. This is another one. We thought that perhaps this story was going away, but it seems to be expanding all the time.
I mean, this is so similar to Partygate. There was only one party, there was no parties, there was one bet, perhaps one bet. Now it turns out that one person may have put lots and lots of bets on, understood, or each of them worth less than £100. Wow. But I think they just look completely stupid. Michael Gove says the big problem they've got with this controversial issue is that it makes the Tory party look like they don't understand real people, that it's us and them and we're different. He's completely missed the point there. That horse has bolted. We all know that politicians are not like us. They don't act like us. I don't think this is a surprise, other than they were so stupid to think they could do it and get away with it. That's what is absolutely staggering. Nobody thinks they're like us anymore. This is what the problem is. This is why voting rates are going to be so low. People are so disenfranchised, and there's the door to open to Nigel Farage to come in and say whatever he wants, because people are just desperate for something different and for some hope.
We must say that there's obviously investigation still ongoing, but certainly it is reminiscent of Partygate. Michael goes absolutely right, isn't he?
He is, because it unfortunately repeats that narrative that got sedimented during the Boris Johnson years, that there's one rule for them, everyone else, and one rule for us. But what's so extraordinary about this, I mean, I'm not condoning this behaviour at all, but what I can't quite work out from the article is whether this man placed a variety of bets on a variety of dates, because he didn't know what date the election would be, or whether there were multiple bets placed on one particular date, which of course we now know to be the 4th of July. Doesn't condone it at all. It's still acting on privileged information. What I also am unclear about is whether this is actually, could this be deemed to be insider trading? As you know, as a former investment banker, this was literally drummed into us from day one, that you don't ever act on privileged information. And there were Chinese walls within departments. It was, you know, the scrutiny was such within the department and within the organisation. And I'm not quite sure why Westminster doesn't operate those same rules. So are we talking about rules that have been broken that are gambling rules, or are we talking about something really serious whereby people could go to jail?
Well, the investigation, as I say, is ongoing into all of the instances that have been alleged. Let's have a look at the Observer. And this is quite a shocking story, actually. The number is shocking. 20,000, the major sewage leaks total in the past decade. Water companies in England and Wales have averaged 5 serious sewage spills into rivers or seas every day over the past decade.
It's awful, isn't it? And it's one of these things that it's grown and grown, but this has been taking place for so long and nobody has done anything about it. It's occurred because the people in charge of our sewage system want to make more money, and this was the cheapest, easiest way for them to do it. I don't think you'll meet anybody out there who agrees with it, other than people who are making money from it, and yet government has failed to act. Now, we've known about this story. I mean, National World's been campaigning on this for a very long time. Lots of the papers have been writing about this. We've been talking about it for ages. And still it goes on, and it's absolutely awful. I mean, 5 a day, and they say they're minor, but I don't think any of us want any minor sewage levels being pumped into any waters.
Indeed. And they say the figures are likely to be an underestimation because the number and severity of sewage spill incidents are self-reported by water companies. Nancy and Lucy, we must leave it there for the moment. We're going to take a break. Coming up, we'll be discussing this on the front of the Observer. Its headline, Starmer's growth plan doomed without access to EU markets. There it is. We'll be right back. Do stay with us.
They were doing everything right. They were on a lifeguarded beach and both could swim. They weren't too deep. They were with people. I'd never ever heard of a drowning in a rip current.
My son said that they were up to about their chest, and then he said just suddenly they couldn't touch the bottom.
Our two weren't weak children. Sunna was tall. Joe was 6 foot tall, strong, muscly, and he got knocked off his feet and taken by the waves. There needs to be discussion about water safety as a whole.
It's a concerning statistic. I mean, there's a lot of contributing factors that could be leading to this rise in child drownings in particular. We've certainly seen probably more warm weather events, and we know that there is a link between those heat waves and instances of drowning. There's more people exploring open water through sports such as paddle boarding or going out and open water swimming in areas that they're not necessarily familiar with. And there's also, in all likelihood, a link between COVID lockdown and people not receiving those swimming lessons because of leisure centres being closed that they might have done in the past. We're in the middle of the Royal Life Saving Society's Drowning Prevention Week. And that's all about learning the water safety code in order to keep you and your family safe, really, around water. And that's about stopping and thinking, assessing the situation before you enter the water, immerse yourself slowly to protect against that cold water shock. It's about staying together not to go out swimming by yourself, but to make sure that there's somebody with you in case somebody does get into trouble. Dial 999, so don't follow somebody in that you see in trouble, because actually that can exacerbate the problem and create more casualties. And then finally, float. And that's about getting onto your back in the starfish position, saving energy and awaiting rescue in the right way. The strapline of the Royal Life Saving Society is about enjoy water safely. So we don't want to put people off going into the water, whether that be at the coast or indeed inland. But certainly when there's youngsters involved, then we're conscious that issues can happen. Therefore, we'd encourage all parents to keep an eye on your children.
Welcome back. You are watching the press preview. Still with me, Editor-in-Chief for the National World, Nancy Fielder, and broadcaster and psychotherapist Lucy Beresford. Let's take a look at the Observer and this pronouncement really on Sir Keir Starmer's economic prowess, saying that his growth plan is doomed without access to EU markets. Lucy, take us into this.
Yeah, so obviously, when you're putting out your manifesto, you have to explain how you're going to get growth, apart from the fact that you don't want to necessarily give too much away. And the Labour Party have been very careful about saying, not wanting to say too much, not wanting to scare the horses, if you like. And yet what they claim is that they're not going to need to raise too many taxes because it's all going to be about growth. But the critics of that are saying, well, you're not going to be able to get growth unless you actually have access to the EU markets. And this is a very delicate area for Keir Starmer because he has repeatedly ruled out, in effect, reversing Brexit. And Brexit, in a way, is the dog that hasn't barked in this election. The Conservatives don't want to talk about it because it hasn't necessarily worked in the way that they hoped it would. Labour doesn't want to talk about it because it doesn't want to alienate people who voted Leave, who voted for Johnson in the 2019 election and who might be persuaded to vote for Labour, to switch back to Labour again. So you've got a very interesting situation for the election. And after the 4th of July, I think what you're going to see is a potential split, that could be the fertile ground for splits within the party going forward. Are there going to be factions of the Labour Party who are going to want to agitate to get back into Europe for all sorts of reasons, including increased prosperity, freedom of movement, maybe rejoining some form of customs union? Keir Starmer himself has talked about the fact that he might be able to negotiate a better deal, although presumably if one was available, that would have been negotiated beforehand. But you might have people within the party who do want to get back and have closer ties to Europe, and other wings of the party who really don't want that.
But Nancy, we know that Sir Keir Starmer yesterday insisted that he wouldn't rejoin the bloc either in the short term or the longer term. It was out of the question.
Yeah, and it's one of the few things that he's actually been very clear on and sort of drawn a line in the sand. Most things he's just very carefully trying to walk a middle line, isn't he? But I mean, again, it's interesting. It depends which paper you read. The Observer, obviously, if you want to be in the EU and you're always against Brexit, then you're going to say actually he's got to if he wants to get the success. If you the sort of papers that campaign the other way are saying that it's all going to be doomed and that the worst thing to do would be to go back in. But if you look at what I think is really interesting is young people are so disillusioned. We all are, but the suggestion that sort of your under 35s, which might not seem that young, are very unlikely to vote. Even the new generation, my 18-year-olds, are a bit like, what's the point? And actually they're the ones who really were against leaving the EU in the first place. So actually, maybe this is something that is going to be forced upon him. As soon as he's in power, the pressure will really ramp up.
Lucy, take us quickly to the Express, and this is quite an attack by the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, you know, suggesting that Sir Keir Starmer's policies would strangle the economy and rig democracy.
Yes, so Jeremy Hunt is standing again, although he also makes a point that he won't be standing to be the next leader, that he's tried that and he feels that he's been given a rounding no from within the party. But he's taking a swipe at actually pretty much everyone. He's taking a swipe at Nigel Farage, he's taking a swipe at Keir Starmer, but he's actually talking about the way in which maybe Keir Starmer might introduce changes, for example, to the age of voting, that actually to reduce it to 16 from 18. And Jeremy Hunt is in effect saying that that could threaten democracy in terms of, I suppose, it's quite an interesting one, because wearing my kind of psychology hat, the changes during during adolescence of the brain do make it harder for people to really necessarily know their own mind and know what they're thinking, and to come to a conclusion around voting might not actually be an appropriate thing to be doing when you're 16. I personally would raise absolutely everything to the age of 19, but that's very
19.
controversial.
Okay,
yes.
that's another discussion, which we don't have time for.
Yeah.
But let's quickly have a look at the Sunday Telegraph and Taylor Swift, a Swift selfie with the royals.
I mean, what a lovely photo. Whatever you think of the royals, this is an incredible photo. I don't think it shows them being particularly having normal treatment. These are incredibly expensive tickets, and there's the incredible access they've got. But it is nice to see everybody.
You can tell
happy
by the size of the smiles.
No,
Brilliant,
you don't see
brilliant
pictures like
photo.
that, Charlotte, very often. Gorgeous photo. So happy.
Nancy and Lucy, thank you very much for taking us through the papers. We'll see you in the next hour. Coming up next on Sky News at 11, more on a missing teenager, Jay Slater.